start, if you can please have your cell phones at the ready. We will be going through 2 quick polls during the course of the webinar this afternoon. And if you can have your QR code ready, your QR code reader on your smartphone ready to be able to scan the QR code once it's presented on the screen, and that will allow you to complete the quick poll on your phone. If you prefer, you can click on the hyperlink that I'll put into the Q&A, and that will allow you then to complete the quick poll on your PC. So thank you very much for joining us. I'm not sure if you joined early enough to see the preceding video, where we just thank you for your continued support and presence during our webinars. And with no further ado, I'll hand over to Linda and Renee. Thank you, Linda, over to you.
So I'm Linda Hammond, I'm the CEO and founder of Talk to Us. And I think for the longest time we've been looking at an old way of thinking and doing, and I suppose it has worked to an extent, but we now need to look at new ways of doing things. And the part that I really want to get more involved with, and I hope people have realized in this time period, is how we can change businesses so that they are more humanistic and more focused on the humanistic side of business. If you consider the last while, doesn't matter which business you went into, if you went to the business during lockdown, it was just an empty building with expensive equipment and lots of furniture. The essence of every brand lies in its people. And so what we have always been focused on, but now more so than ever, is how do we take that power from the people and harness that and use good communication tools to get inspired and motivated. So, good saying that I read somewhere, I read a good saying somewhere, which said, words are like magic, they cast spells, so be careful of which ones you use. So a quick update on who we are. We're Talk to Us, a consulting agency, and people often ask, well, what's the difference between that and an agency? The consulting side is that we actually offer advisory services on business and in the branding, marketing, and communication change management side. And on the agency side, we actually do the execution as well. So they're both elements that we cover. And that's really why we are a consulting agency. Let me just give you a bit more info around who we are. So if you just have a look, our main purpose is to build brand confidence, and we use your people to do that. All right, we teach them mechanisms and practices to actually provide them with mechanisms and give them practices so that they can build the confidence in your brand. How does that happen? It happens through a couple of things. The first thing is if you have got a clear purpose and you develop your brand around that, and you then align your strategy, you then have a brand, and the brand is an internal function. It's something that you do with your people, and you determine who you are and what you stand for. Then you have an emotional connection that you need to get in order for your brand to be worth something. Otherwise, it's just a pretty picture. And for it to be worth something, you need to emotionally connect with your market. How do you do that? Through marketing and sales. And the process the marketing and sales use is they create an experience. So they activate your brand through various communication mechanisms. Between the two is how do you remain self-aware and understand what you're doing at every single step of the way. And not only that, how do you bring your people along? Because although you may have developed the brand as a business owner or as a corporate, and you may have a marketing infrastructure, your people still need to know how to deliver that. And that's quite important. And how to deliver any new products you have, any new things that you implement, and that's around change management. So the self-awareness side is really the bridge between who you are and what you do. And you need to reflect on that continuously in order to stay up to date with the latest trends of what's happening. That happens through integrated communication. You need to communicate with all your stakeholders. There needs to be consistency of the communication, and it needs to be in line with their consumption preferences and also in line with their generation. What is the information they like to see, and how do you slant that communication so it actually is relevant to them? So just a little bit more about us. So I won't be long. It's 100% South African owned. We were established in 2000. We have a flagship product called 4C Engage, and it's a leadership communication program. We've had over 1,500 people on that, a lot of blue chip companies. We have about 150 clients. We have done about 320 change management programs that we've taken our clients through over the years. We have done about 151 internal communication strategies for large organizations and smaller ones. And then we are also the exclusive reseller of a product called Net Presenter, which is very similar to something like your News24 app, where you publish information and you send it out on various mechanisms, whether it's a screen or whether it's a PC or whether it's a mobile. So those are all the advisory side, except for the Net Presenter. That's more a mechanistic thing. But where the rubber hits the road is the agency side of things. And all the products that we provide there are the things that you would typically see in a marketing agency. We do graphic design, we do branding, we do social media, we do internal comms, we do videos and photography. So all of the things that you would usually see as the executable version of whatever was designed conceptually, we do those as well. I'll now hand over to Renee, and she'll take you through the sort of first part of the presentation. Thanks, Renee.
Thank you. We want to kick off today's webinar first and foremost, like we've been all the other webinars, with a quick poll. We will give the results through at the end of the webinar. But we would like you to answer this question: how are you experiencing the restructure? Remember that today's theme is to talk about rebuilding confidence after a restructure. So most of you probably are engaged in a restructure through your organisation right at the moment. How are you experiencing that restructure? We'll give you a minute or so to quickly answer that. So, like we've done in all the other webinars, we talk about the old way of thinking, and we are arguing that we are now in a new normal and there is a new way of thinking. When it comes to the restructure of a company and how you rebuild confidence after that, we say that the old way of thinking is that we do a restructure and we think that life is just going to go back to normal. We've now taken out some cost, we've repositioned the business, things are going to work the way they used to. However, the new way of thinking is that there should be deliberate confidence rebuilding steps that you take. And we want to talk to that during the rest of this presentation. We're going to talk about 4 components of rebuilding confidence. The first component is that we are arguing that one should think big, and in order to do that, apply whole brain thinking. I'm going to talk a little bit more about that later on. The second component is to build a culture of respect in your organisation. Linda is going to elaborate on that. And the third component is to focus on action. Nothing builds confidence as much as putting action and energy behind a plan. And I will talk about that later on. And then the last one, understanding the mechanics of trust and to use trust to hold things together. Linda is going to talk about that later in the presentation. So if you put all those things together, those 4 ingredients to rebuild confidence, then you have a confident organisation and can move forward. So the first important thing, just to give you context to the 4 aspects that we're going to discuss just now, is that in order to manage the aftermath of a restructuring process, one should, in a responsible way, anticipate the consequences. You can't just go and cut out costs, which at this point in time is probably the most important catalyst to a restructure. In this current environment, companies are taking out costs to resize their business and fit their business into an environment of lower turnover. However, one has to look at the full picture and make sure that you exploit that restructure to the benefit of the longer term of the organisation. So the aspects that one should consider in our view is, first of all, what will be the consequence of the restructure on your rainmakers? Will they stay? Will they be motivated? Will they be engaged? And that very much will depend on how you manage your restructure and how much confidence you build. The second one is your output or productivity. How does restructure affect that? So we're going to not just focus on taking the costs out, but thinking about what then happens to your output. Innovation and the whole culture of innovation in the organization will definitely be affected positively or negatively by your restructure, and you need to also apply your mind to that. And then lastly, obviously, a restructure can be used as a very effective tool to pivot the organization. So what we are saying is that how you manage your restructure and the aftermath of that will either build confidence or it will destroy confidence. So the consequences of a restructure will be amplified as time goes by, and it is why we're arguing that you should think long term and not just getting the cost out next month and then what happens to the business. So leadership, by the way they manage the aftermath, will determine the trajectory of that confidence and of the consequence.
Right. So I think really, as we've said earlier on, it's the people that actually make a difference. And in situations like this, everyone is a hero. You need to find your inner hero and you need to help everybody else. What we're seeing currently is there are a lot of leaders in business, and when I'm speaking about a leader, I'm speaking about anybody who has others reporting into them. That's what I'm considering as a leader. So if you have any people who report directly into you, you are in our books considered a leader. And that doesn't mean that other people can't lead either. It just means it's slightly more difficult for them because they like a slice of ham in the sandwich. They themselves are worried about their own situation, etc. And they have to somehow calm down and keep the other people positive and motivated who report into them. And that makes it really difficult. So this is why we're saying everyone is a hero. And I think, situations like this absolutely depict that everyone is a hero. So how do you do that? Well, firstly, you need belief in the cause. So once a restructure has taken place, and similar to what happened in South Africa, originally when Cyril Ramaphosa came out and said, yes, we need to go into lockdown, I think there was belief in the cause and everybody bought into it and they got behind it. And this is the same. Once your organization is restructured or it has made some changes, everybody needs to believe the rationale behind it and get behind it. The next thing is we need to have hearts that are courageous. So even if we're going to see some of our colleagues leave and if there are going to be things that we really enjoyed in our workplace and they're no longer going to be there, we still need to look at it from the point of view of we need to move forward. We can't get stuck in the past and we need to be courageous about it. And that takes a lot. It takes a lot of heart to do that. And then we need to take our hands and put our thoughts into actions. So very similar to what Renee said earlier, is that you want people to get action orientated. That's exactly what we're also saying. So once you've told your staff what's going to happen and how it's going to change, and leaders understand now, how do we take those thoughts that we have and those plans that we have and put them into action? Because while people are doing, they're no longer worrying or they're worrying less. And then how do you empower your instinct? Because there are many people who are thinking, yo, is this the right thing? Is this is being thrust upon us now? Are we going in the right direction or should we be doing it differently? And that's really difficult. And one of the reasons, and something that we're going to touch on a little bit more just now, is in a situation like this, is everybody is a leader in some ways, but they are also followers. And it is something that is not spoken about often. There's a stigma attached to the word followers, but we're all followers. Whether you're Mike Brown, you are following what your shareholders are telling you to do. Everybody is a follower in the organization, and some are leaders as well. And how can you be a good follower? And I think that's a topic that we'll cover in a separate session altogether, but followership is really important in the current situation. Because if you're not prepared to help your leaders by following them, no one's going to succeed and we're all going to be worse off. So everybody has to look at the aspects of followership and understand why it's really important and understand how can they be a good follower. And lastly, all the qualities that you need to build confidence really reside on this one slide, except for followership, which I've talked about, but I haven't put a picture up about it. But I think you understand it. The next piece is really about how confidence shows up. And what I want to talk about there is really an element of, you understand what your purpose is. Sorry, give me 1 second. I think I've gone the wrong slide. Is this the right one? Okay, sorry. I got a few minutes. I just lost my mojo there. How does confidence show up? It shows up by understanding your purpose. So as long as the organization understands its purpose, which most organizations do, or if they've redefined it, they've shared it with everybody. There's then a number of different elements within the organization where people need to make sure that they now understand how they fit into that purpose. So let me explain that a bit better. Throughout the organization, your culture and values remain. They would not have changed, and they're your North Star. They're going to drive you and guide you to where you need to go. But sitting directly around your purpose are 3 key things. They're the people in your business, the customers, and your processes and your procedures, how you look after the business, the infrastructure of the business. For each of these, there are then 3 concentric levels, and they are your immediate leadership, which is the executive team, and they all follow a certain function that they perform within those 3 categories. So when it comes to your people, they'll build a team. They'll align people to understand and act accordingly. They'll create a sense of mission. If it comes to processes and procedures or infrastructure, they'll do things differently there by challenging the status quo with a view of improving the situation. Ask what and why, and they set the direction. Under the customer side, they'll keep an eye on the horizon, what's coming in, they'll innovate to meet the new requirements, and they'll develop their people accordingly. If you have a look at that, Renee will speak to some of that in organizations who have gone through a restructuring from the point of view that that is their horizon, that's how they're going to innovate. Or they've had to change by having people work from home. So these are the things that the executive team would usually set up and give the guidelines to. Sitting around that are the enablers in your business, and those are the managers. And the managers do the right things. So if you'll see, leadership does things differently, and then the managers do the right things. So their role and what sits in their portfolio is slightly different from the point of view that if you look at it from a customer point of view, they retain the customers. What can we do to retain our customers? What can we do to empower and enable our people to deliver to those customers? And what can we do to change certain things in our business and plan the route and change how we measure our business, etc. So they have got a slightly different role to the executive team. And then lastly, you've got your people who are at the coalface. And their elements that they need to look after is they need to make sure that the customers come first. They need to deliver to the customer. They need to put the customer at the center of everything they do. When people start crossing those swim lanes, it becomes a problem, and then people become less confident. So in a lot of instances, managers and the top leadership or the executive team start crossing over. And then you get this, but they said we'll do that, and no, we should rather do this. And then the poor staff at the bottom don't actually understand now who they should be listening to, and that breaks down confidence. So it's important that everybody sticks to these swim lanes and understands exactly what is their purpose within delivering the overall organizational purpose. So I'm going to now again hand over to Renee, and she's going to speak about the 4 elements.
So we're going to go into a little bit more depth now on each of these 4 elements that makes up confidence and that therefore assists us to rebuild confidence after restructuring. Starting with thinking big and applying whole brain thinking. So what we are saying is that one has to see the big picture, and one has to think about the big picture and the longer term when you go through a restructure, and not just think about, like I said earlier, the immediate objective of taking out cost. The brain thinks in 4 different ways. We've got analytical thinking, and that is personified, for instance, by actuaries and accountants. You have experimental thinking, and scientists come to mind as a good example there. Relational thinking, which could be HR people or social workers, and practical thinking, a good example there would be engineers. Now, what we are arguing is that one must employ all these areas of how one thinks. And ideally, if we could put together a team that has the ability to think in all these different modes, that would be the best recipe for taking the business forward. When you combine analytical and experimental thinking, you go into the intellectual sphere. And we would say that, remember, the consequences I spoke about at the beginning of the presentation, and where I said that amongst other things one has to think about the impact on innovation of your restructure. If you can employ the intellectual space there, then you would be able to make sure that you look after innovation. And ELH is a good example of having used that in their restructure process that they went through last year. On the analytical side, they quickly had to dive in and root out the problem areas. On the experimental side, they needed to reposition their business to be able to continue offering digital services, which is quickly changing, as we know. When one combines the experimental and rational thinking, that's the intuitive side of things. And in thinking on the intuitive level, one is able to retain your rainmakers in the organization, because they're the guys that are interested in making sure that the right brain thinking side of things happen in the organization. Then when you combine practical and relational thinking, that's the instinctive space. And that is the area that enables the organization to pivot. A good example there would be Uber. When they launched their business, we all know how quickly and rapidly they grew. And then a lot of competitors came in and copied their recipe and started competing with them in the marketplace. So they had to apply practical thinking. How can we use the platform that we already have to take our business forward? And relational thinking in terms of how can we use the relationship we already have with the existing customer base to add more services, and Uber Eats was born out of that. And then lastly, if you combine practical and analytical thinking, in other words, we go into the very rational side, the left-hand brain thinking, then you are able to protect the output levels of your organization. And there a good example is how Africa Bank went about their restructure, where both on the analytical side, like with EOH, they had to quickly move in and take the problem areas out, and on the practical side, they created what they called the good bank, and they built the business from there. So think big, apply whole brain thinking is one of the definite areas that we believe one has to employ to rebuild confidence after a restructure. Back to you, Linda.
Thanks. Okay. So one needs to build a culture of respect through this process. You don't want to lose respect for each other, even though things have changed radically. And the question is obviously, how does one do that? Well, the first thing is to create a consistent narrative, and share it widely, and empower all leadership to be the channel. And I think that's important. There's no point in sending out communication on various platforms and leadership don't know about it, because if I'm unsure about something, the first person I'm going to speak to is my direct report. And if they don't know about it, that really starts creating an element of what is going on. It has uncertainty, it breaks down confidence, and it also means that somewhere along there's a breakdown in the chain of respect, because if I respect you, I won't compromise you as one of my leaders, and that's really important. So how do we go about doing that? We talk about the future. So we say, what are the things that are going to happen into the future? Who is going to be affected? How are they going to be affected? When are they going to be affected? We ask others for input, and we listen with empathy. What is it that they can add to the value? And then we stay in touch with purpose. So if you remember the purpose circle, we're going to do this. These are the people who are going to do it. Others are going to help in a certain area. So that's really the process that one would follow. We've often done this with a lot of our clients in change management programs, and what we provide them, the leadership team, with is a cheat sheet. And it looks something like this. So it's an agent of change, and it says, well, who's the change agent? You are. If you're not, then prepare to be one, because there's certain things that are going to happen. You need to be visible, accessible. So this is a cheat sheet for leadership so that they can understand exactly what's going to come their way, how they need to deal with it, and we prepare them accordingly. We give them frequently asked questions. We give them the concepts of understanding how to manage change, etc. So I think it's just important that everybody understands this, and these are the types of tools that you can give people, whether electronic or whether on paper based. Right, Renee.
So the third element of building confidence after a restructure is to focus on action. So like I said earlier, there's nothing like an action-oriented environment and high-energy environment that rebuilds confidence. I want to specifically talk, however, about the importance of making sure that we stay, like Linda just said now, linked to our purpose. So it can happen that there's a lot of action but no link to purpose, and that will not build confidence. So if one looks at this grid, where on the bottom axis we speak about going from low action bias to high action bias, and on the left-hand side, going in terms of your link to your purpose from being not a strong link to being a very strong link, then these are the different scenarios that can play out. So if we are not in touch with our purpose and we don't talk about our purpose, we don't understand our why as an organization, and we're not taking much action, and this is now after the restructure, then people feel there's no light and no movement. No light at the end of the tunnel, there's no movement, and there's obviously then zero confidence. In an environment where there's a lot of frantic activity happening, which is often the consequence of a restructure, people are shaken, a lot of people's jobs changed, but in that kind of environment where we have not linked what we're doing to purpose, not reminded everybody in the organization what their purpose and the greater organizational purpose is, then there is no confidence in spite of all the action. And in fact, people feel afraid because they don't see light at the end of the tunnel. In a scenario where we are very in touch and very aware of our purpose, but for some or other reason, there's not much action happening because we're not feeling that sure of ourselves, we feel hesitant, we feel paralyzed, that link to purpose is not going to solve the problem, and it will be a sense of false confidence. So obviously the ideal that one wants is that there's a high and very strong link to purpose, that there's a lot of positive action that is aligned with purpose, and people will then be confident because they can see the light at the end of the tunnel and they know that we are moving towards it. Back to Linda to talk about the last ingredient here.
The last thing I want to talk about is really understanding the mechanisms of trust and using trust to hold things together. And that's really important, because if you don't have trust, you don't have any relationship. If you've got no relationship, you cannot build confidence. It's quite simple. So the first thing is you need to build a pillar of trust, which we're going to go through just now. But before we do that, I just want to say to you, where's trust born? So what you say you do, what you actually do, and what you experience is where trust is born. If those three are aligned, you will have trust. If they're not aligned, you're going to have an issue which looks a bit like this. If something looks like a duck and swims like a dog, it will not be trusted. So you have to align what you say you do, what you actually do, and what people experience, otherwise you won't be trusted. So let's just get, and that's brands as well. So individual brands, if they have a brand promise, which is one thing, but they don't deliver on that brand, there's also distrust in brand. And when there's distrust, there's no relationship, no confidence. So let's just take you through the pillars of trust, because they are a core part of our book that will be sent to you. So there is a self-help workbook on trust, which we will send to you. And it really speaks to 5 pillars of trust. Trust comes from competency. So often you think that somebody is not trustworthy because they haven't done what they said they would do. But there has to be some consideration about, can they do it? Are they capable of doing it? So competency is one of the pillars. Consistency is another. somebody does something amazing today and tomorrow they don't do it the same, you now wonder what happened. Did somebody else do it for them, or what are they going to give me next time? So you rather would not give it to them because there's a breakdown in consistency. Integrity. So a lot of people say, well, what does integrity mean? Very simple explanation. Do the right thing even when no one's watching. And that's really integrity. Concern. Have they got a level of concern, or is there a level of ownership of something? Do they believe that this is just as important to me as what it is to you? And that's also a trust issue. And then time, trust builds up over time. It breaks down immediately like a log that's cut down, but it can be built up over time. And it's something that I think is often very necessary. So our self-help guide speaks a lot to all of these elements, and it gives you a guide on how to build organizational trust. Absolutely worth a read, and maybe taking some of your people through it. So that then takes us to the sort of last part of how we get confidence. And yeah, there's another quick poll. So if you can go through this one as well, we'd be very grateful.
So we really want to ask the questions. The question to you, we've taken you through what we believe are the 4 ingredients of rebuilding confidence. And what we want you to consider for a moment is, do you think that your leadership or your organization is currently doing the right things to rebuild stakeholder confidence, bearing in mind the input that we've given you? So perhaps you can just take a minute or two again to answer this question, and we will give you the feedback at the end of the session. So we're arguing that if one employs those 4 ingredients for rebuilding confidence after a restructure, then confidence will have been restored, and there will be a much smoother pathway into the future for your organization, and you'll actually come out stronger than what you were before the restructure.
I think a number of organizations have and are still looking at how to restructure and what to do, but I think there will be consequences related to that, and I think the communication around that is really important. We're going to go to the quick poll results and just show you what those look like. Right, so now if we get all of those things right and we know what we're doing, what success will look like to an organization is this.
So first and foremost, there will be open communication and ongoing communication with stakeholders, and a very important, perhaps the most important thing that one must keep in mind in building confidence is communication. The better you inform all your stakeholders, be it your employees, be it your suppliers, your customers, your investors, of what is going on, of why you're doing it, of what you foresee to be the outcomes, the stronger the relationship and the stronger the trust and confidence will be. Secondly, people will believe in the future. Very often people, when they go through a restructure, feel that it's the end of the world and that they're not sure whether there's actually a future for themselves and the organization. In an environment where we manage the aspect of confidence properly, there will be belief in the future. And then thirdly, you will have stakeholder support. It is not possible to implement a strategy, and particularly a turnaround strategy, to take a business into the future if not of your stakeholders, your employees, suppliers, customers, investors do not support you. And then lastly, in such an organization, people will know and believe that restructure is not contraction. You can actually use it to pivot. You can actually use it to put your business in a stronger position if you apply these principles that we were talking about today and you don't just focus on the immediate cost-cutting exercise.
So that's us for the day. Thanks, guys. We stayed bang on time today, the 45 minutes, as we had said. And we really just want to thank you all for attending, and hopefully you can make next week's one, because that's self-awareness, and that comes back to this. They all sort of like tie up to one another. If you sort of understood the where we were previously about confidence and how people are feeling and how communication helps with the process, and then if you have a look at after restructuring, how do you remain self-aware to see what's working, what's not working, what you need to change. And so that's next week's session. Charles will send you the invite, and he will also send you today's link to the recording as well as the booklet. Charles, further information from your side?
No, nothing else from my side. Thank you, Linda. There's no questions from the Q&A either, so I think it's a wrap.
Great.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, everybody. See you next week. Have a nice week. Stay warm. It's really cold out there. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.